Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I'm going to show you how to set up your self-portrait. I'm going to show you how to grid your reference paper and how to put a grid on your drawing paper, and then I'm going to start drawing. I'm not going to finish my self-portrait today, but I'll at least get a little bit done so that you can see how to approach this. So the tools that I'm using. Um, I would suggest, and I have this stuff if you need. Um, so I'm using my weapon of choice is the Prismacolor, this way, ebony pencil. But I've also got, and this is not, you don't absolutely have to have one of these. I'm going to use it because I have it. I'm using a 4H, which is a very hard lead, and I'm going to use this when I do my grid on my drawing paper so that my grid lines are not too dark. And I have a 4B and a 7B sitting over here. I may or may not use those. I'll probably just stick to the ebony pencil, and I might use the 4H when I first start drawing. But I've also got a kneaded eraser that I'm going to open up right now. So the kneaded erasers are nice because I can pinch it and squeeze it and manipulate it to the shape I need. So if I need to just erase a small little spot, or even I can even draw with my kneaded eraser. Like if I shade something in with a dark or a middle gray, I can just pinch my kneaded eraser to a point, and then I can kind of streak and like kind of take away and kind of draw with the negative, right? So first things first, my basement's a mess, but I've got a ruler, and I'm going to start with the grid on my reference photo. So the grid that I want on this is going to be 1 inch by 1 inch. And because this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, I am going to have an extra ½ inch on one edge. And remember, in class, I told you that when you measure this, you don't want to measure your marks and then flip your paper. Do not do that because your lines will be on an angle. So I'm going to put my ruler down, and I'm measuring not from the edge of the picture, but from the edge of the paper. So some people might have, I have a little bit of a white margin around the edge. Some people, depending on how you printed it, you may not have a little bit of a margin, or you may have a little bit more on one side or the other. It doesn't matter. Pay no attention to your reference picture yet. Only measure from the edge of the paper, not the edge of the picture. So I'm going to make a mark at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then there's that extra ½ inch. And here's the thing with graphite. I've got some dark areas on my reference picture, and people are always like, oh, I'm not going to be able to see because I got this, if it's a girl with like black hair, or if it's a guy with a dark shirt on or something, like, oh, I'm not going to be able to see this on my reference picture. No, the graphite has a reflective quality. So even if you can't see it when you're looking straight at it, if you tip it a little bit, it'll reflect enough where you'll be able to identify where those boxes are when we start using the grid. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dots at the top, dots at the bottom. And now I draw my lines. And here's another point. If like we're using a grid because if we don't use a grid, our self-portraits are going to look like that one that Napoleon Dynamite drew for Deb or whoever it was, where he's like, I spent 4 hours shading your upper lip. That's not a good portrait. We use the grid in order to keep our drawing in proportion so that it actually looks like us when we're done. So when people say, well, why do I have to measure? What difference does it make? If your measurements are off, if your grid is off, so using a grid is a more sophisticated way to keep your drawing in proportion to your reference picture. So it's a way to make sure that you have a more advanced level of accuracy with your drawing. And if your grid is not drawn correctly, then that accuracy is suffers. So so if we don't draw this with precision, if we don't create these grids with precision, then all the effort that we put forth in trying to draw a self-portrait that looks like us, all that effort's wasted because we kind of sink our ship from the beginning if our grid is not accurate what it needs to be. So now I'm going down the other side. I'm going the long way on my reference photo. And I'm going to sharpen my pencil. I don't know why I put my pencil sharpener away. Silly. All right. And then another thing too, like this always makes me laugh when people put 2 dots on a piece of paper and then they put the ruler down. They go, oh, my dots are off. It doesn't line up. No, your ruler moves. So I'll put my pencil down on one dot and then let's see. So I've got my pencil down on this dot. Here, I'll show you on a separate piece of paper. I'll do. So if I have a dot here, let's do this. If I have a dot here and a dot here, whoops, right? To draw a straight line between these 2 dots, if I put my pencil on this dot and I push my ruler up to it, I can now slide my ruler back and forth, right? So I can feel with this hand whether or not that pencil moves. So I'm making sure that this pencil is not going to move. And so I'm using 2 of my senses. I'm using touch and I'm using sight. So I can feel to make sure this pencil doesn't move. And I can watch this dot and I will just close in on that. And some people, like, the back of the ruler slides out. I put 2 fingers like that. So I got one finger on one side of the pencil, the other finger on the other side of the pencil, and I can, as long as my paper doesn't move, rotate that ruler until It's lined up with that dot. And then I can draw that line, perfectly straight line from one dot to the next. So that's what I'm doing as I'm drawing these lines across my reference picture. And you have to trust your measurements. If you've done your measurements correctly, there's always there's nothing in the way. So there's no reason that you can't connect two dots with a straight edge, unless you have like a rock or some like a hole in your paper or something. You should always be able to connect two dots with one straight line. So there you have it. And then another thing, because my pencil was pressed up against this edge, I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm actually going to erase the edge of that. You see how much gunk? Can you see that? It's pretty gunked up. And that's going to keep my drawing from smudging. So there we have it. And you can see even now with the lights that I have on in my basement, like you can see how that graphite reflects. So even those dark areas in my beard, or even this little line down here in the lower left, like you can see how that reflects, and it's always going to be visible, even if it's in a dark area. All right, so I'm going to put that little guy aside. I'm going to check my hands to make sure I don't have a whole lot of graphite. I got a little bit of stuff over here. I'm just going to rub my kneaded eraser on it just to make sure that it's not going to come off and get messy. Clean my workspace a little bit. So now I'm going to take my drawing paper, and I'm going to use my 4H pencil for this. I would not suggest using a soft lead pencil because you don't want to. We're going to erase these lines as we work. So remember this now. So this was a 1 inch by 1 inch grid. So this is going to be a 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch grid. So I'm going to do the same thing. 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12, 13.5, 15, 16.5. And my paper is 18 inches long, so it stops right there. Now you might not be able to see these pencil lines, and that's because, like I said, I want to ensure that this grid will disappear as I start to do my drawing. Because then if nobody knows that I used a grid, it becomes even more amazing. They go, wow, how'd you do that? I'm just good. So there we have it. And if you've drawn your grid way too dark, so I can barely see these lines, which is exactly what I want. If you've drawn your grid too dark, you could probably flip your paper over and draw your portrait on the back. That might lighten it up enough. Or you can redraw your grid, and instead of remeasuring everything, you can just take it and trace it on a light box. And make sure if you trace it, you use a ruler, because like I said before, these lines have to be as accurate as you can possibly make them. Otherwise, your face is going to get distorted. So these boxes are square. So whether it's 1 by 1 or 1.5 by 1.5, they're absolutely perfectly square on both the drawing and the reference. So if you have boxes on your drawing that are longer than they are wide, your face is going to be stretched longer, and if they're wider than they are long, your face is going to be stretched this way, and you're going to look pudgy. Like me, my self-portrait's gonna look pudgy anyways, because I'm a pudgy fella, but I don't want it to look any extra pudgy. I don't need any additional pudge. I'm good on that. There we go. So now I'm going to draw these lines across. And I'm going to have a grid on both my reference and my drawing. Hi, Ange. She didn't hear me. My wife just came home. Hello. Oh, hi. I'm doing a video. All right, so there we go. And let's see, can you see that? I can't. You might be able to. Those are very, very, very light lines. I lost my, there it is, ebony pencil. So I'm almost ready to start drawing my reference, or drawing my self-portrait. There's one thing that I'm going to do before I begin. And if you've ever played Battleship, this should be familiar to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to use letters across the top. I'm going to do letters across the top, and then I'm going to do numbers down the side. So this first square is going to be designated A1. And this is going to be B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. And then this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. So that when I'm drawing in the middle of my paper, I'm going to use a softer lead pencil for this. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now, I almost did a thing that I would have been upset about. So in square A3, I have a lot of important information. So a majority of the pupil and iris of my, my right eye. So I almost numbered right over that, which wouldn't have been the end of the world, but it would have made it difficult to actually see what's going on in that square. So now that I've got my letters and numbers on my reference page, I'm going to do the same thing. And again, I've switched back to my 4H, my hard lead pencil, which is going to not make dark lines. It's going to be very light. And I'll go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So here, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So my reference picture going down goes to 11. This goes to 12. Here goes to I. Here goes to H. So it's not exactly the same size, but it's close. So I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose this half of a column on the right hand side, which is not a big deal. There's not much there anyway, so that's going to be gone. All right, I think I'm ready to start. So the biggest, let's see, I'm going to put a mark on this. So this is 22 minutes. So the most important thing that this is the hardest thing to do, and the most important thing when you're drawing your self-portrait, if you want this to look good, when you draw your facial features, the biggest mistake people make is they try to draw eyes to look like eyes. They try to draw noses to look like noses. When you're doing a self-portrait, you have to switch the way you think. You have to only draw the values that you see. If you can think in terms of value and not in terms of the actual object that you're looking at, your self-portrait will turn out far, far better than it would have if you're just trying to draw an eye look like an eye. And I'll tell you right off the bat, when I look at my reference picture, my left eye in this reference picture is pretty strange looking. If I sit and look at it and take my time looking at what the shapes and the values are, it looks weird. So I'm going to draw it to look weird because that's the way it looks in the picture. And if I draw it weird like it is in the picture, then it's going to look like a picture, which is what I want it to do. So that's what I'm talking about. Like this, I've got my eyes wide open and I'm not looking straight ahead. I'm looking in the corner. So that by itself, like if I cut this out, if I just cut this little section out and left it on a table somewhere and somebody picked it up, I don't know if they would necessarily immediately recognize that as being an eye. So when you're drawing and you go, oh my God, my nose doesn't look like a nose, that's okay. Because once you get, like, your brain requires other contextual clues. Even if you don't realize that, it needs that other stuff. It needs those two eyes and that nose and that mouth to piece together what else is going on. So, all right, step one. And I'm going to start with that eye. I'm going to start in this general area because I've got some nice highlights through here. I've got some nice dark values through here, and I've got some medium grays. So I'll show you how to attack all of those things. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scratch and itch and have a drink of water. I'm going to have a cough drop. I'm going to grab my ebony pencil. Actually, nope. Psych. I'm going to grab my 4H. Because I'll just get them both. So, first thing I want to do is I want to figure out where these values are. I want to identify where these values change so that what my drawing is going to first look like is just a series of like contour lines that's going to identify these changes in value. And then what happens is it becomes almost a paint by number. If you've ever done one of those, then all you're doing is, if you do the thinking ahead of time and the planning ahead of time, when it's time to start shading and putting value down, you don't have to think about where does this 7 change to a 4, or where does this 10 value stop. So I'm going to do all of those things right now. And I'm going to first, with my ebony pencil, I'm going to kind of draw some guidelines for myself. And the lighting in the basement here is such that when I've got 2 lamps going. So when I hang my hand over any particular area, sometimes the shadow looks like it's actually part of the picture. Right. So that's what I'm starting with. Right? So I've outlined, even up here, I'll do a little bit more with the shadow under my eye, the little bags area. So this is what I'm working with right now. So you see how even underneath here, I've outlined. So maybe this is like a 2 going into like a 3, and then the same thing over here. I've got like a 3. Then maybe this is like a 5, 6, or a 7 in through here. So I've started to identify where these values change. Now, the first step in my drawing is I'm actually going to draw these lines that I've just created on this. So right here, let's start with this square. So this is F. What's that? F3. So then I'm going to go to F3 on my drawing. And I'm going to draw that in. And at this point, I'm drawing so light that I'm not really committing to anything. If I make a mistake, all these lines are light enough, it's very easy to erase them. So I'm looking to see where these lines cross at different intersections. So like most of that shape is in F3. It kind of creeps into G3, but like if this is the middle of G3 right here, that dark value doesn't even quite hit the middle. So I'm trying to watch my proportions, but I'm only drawing like one little square at a time. And then so this bottom eyelid, same thing. I'm gonna focus on this line, and I'm just gonna look where that line comes around, and it kind of sneaks into G3 a little bit, but it's very, very close to this intersection right here. This is hard to do, to point to these things, but here I have an intersection. So between GH3 and 4, that lower eyelid kind of creeps right through there, and then it starts to swing back around. And if I ever get confused about, does this shape, does it go beyond the halfway point, or does it stop? Does it change directions before it gets to the middle? If I need to, I can take a square and I can break it up into 4 smaller squares, and I can eyeball it. So, for example, if I'm not sure about maybe I'm confused about F2. Maybe I don't know exactly where that little dip, that little change in direction happens. I'm sorry, F2. I can take and eyeball it. And I can break up those squares on my reference picture and also on my drawing. You probably can't see that. Maybe you can a little bit. So very lightly, but I did the same thing. So if I like to work on a couple squares at a time, and I like to put the lines in first, and then put the values down. So now here's a spot between G and H. I don't quite know where this part of the eyeball, I don't know where that comes, where it goes from H back to G. I want to make sure that that's accurate. So I'm going to have to, all I'll do is just put a little hashtag or a hash mark right there, right about where I think the middle of that line is. And just having that extra little reference point at the midway point helps me eyeball it a little bit better. The more reference points I have, the easier it is to do. Like we could have done a half-inch by half-inch grid and 3/4-inch grid on here and had double the amount of squares. That's a lot more work and it takes a lot more time, but it would have been more accurate as well. I want to break that again. I'm going to put another little hash mark. And this is why it's important to understand fractions. So I've just, to figure out where this line of my eye intersects this reference line, I put a line at the halfway mark, and that wasn't enough. So I need another half of a half. So I'm going to take and I'm going to put another little hash mark between this half and this line. So then this becomes 1/4 of the box. So I'm going to cut it into quarters. And I see that that line comes just to the left. If I've got my self-portrait like this, it comes just on the inside of that 1/4 inch, or not 1/4 inch, but that 1/4 hash mark. So this is interesting because I know that I have an upper eyelid, obviously. But when I look at my reference picture, the way that the shadows are, just broke my table. Too much Halloween candy. So right here, I cannot see right in here, like this line where it's a dark value and then it's like a middle value here. Obviously, that's where my upper eyelid is. But over here, there's the same value. The shadow of my eyeball matches the shadow of my eyelid, and there's no line differentiating where one stops and one starts. So guess what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to draw that eyelid there if I don't see it. And that's the biggest thing. If I put that in and it doesn't exist in my reference picture, it's going to end up looking like a cartoon. And I don't want to make myself a cartoon. So now I've switched to my ebony pencil. I'm actually drawing my guidelines on my drawing with my ebony pencil, but I'm doing it lightly so that if I need to make changes, I don't have to erase real hard. And again, if you remember when we sketched our noses, it was either Wednesday or Thursday, I told you if you want things to look more realistic, try not to use hard lines. You want to use different values to create the forms of the things that you're drawing. So, let's see. Probably can't see any of this on the camera, but I promise you I'm drawing stuff. This kind of reminds me of my drawing kind of looks like a rooster or something, like some kind of a bird. That's what it looks like to me. All right, so here's my drawing. You can see that. So that absolutely does not look like an eye. And that doesn't worry me at all because, like I said, I'm not trying to make it look like an eye. I'm only trying to match the values that I see. So now I think I'm ready to start putting some dark values in here. And I'm going to start shading this eyeball and then the area around it. And I'm going to try to make those values match the values on my reference picture. So I'm going to start with the darker areas, and then I'm going to kind of work my way towards the areas that are a little bit lighter. So I've got it's like a 10 value here, a 10 value underneath here, where my top eyelid kind of meets my eyeball, like a 10 value around here, and then it kind of lightens up a little bit, I think. So it's like a 9 maybe right there, and then it kind of it's darker around the edge of the eyeball. Or not the eyeball, rather the iris. And there's some darker splotchy areas. So that's what I have right now. And here, this is still doesn't look like an eye. And when I shade, I don't know. Like, I never had a drawing instructor tell me to do this. Uh, but I did have my graphic design teacher told me um, when I shade with, when you use markers, if you go in a circular pattern, you actually hide the lines that you're making. So like when you color with marker, you know how it's kind of like, especially like Crayola markers, it kind of makes it streaky a little bit, and you can see like every marker stroke. If I use circles, it kind of blends as it goes, and you can kind of hide those circles. So I'm going to go through and kind of blend that in. Another thing that I don't ever use is a blending stomp. I know a lot of people like them. I have a drawer full of them in my classroom. They never really did anything for me. And now I've lost my kneaded eraser. And that is something I can't live without. Darn it. I probably have another one. Foo. What the heck did I do with it? Oh, there it is. Sweet. So I've shaded in. I'm going to lighten that up just a little bit, and it's way darker, but I don't know. Can you see that? So there's a little bit of a highlight just above my pupil, and in my drawing, it's a way brighter highlight. So I'm going to leave it because it's always easier to darken it in than it is to have to erase it afterwards. So once I'm done with my self-portrait, or once I'm like 90% complete, I'll go back through and kind of dig in and polish up some of those areas that maybe where the values don't quite match. It could be darker or lighter. So I'm going to pick at this a little bit more, and then I'm going to move on. Now, the other thing I see is that right above, just above this, I wonder if I can get you guys closer. Let's try it. Ain't gonna work. Maybe. This is really hard to draw like this. Okay. So, kind of. So, like right above here, there's a little bit of a highlight. And not even a highlight, but it's like a middle gray, and then it goes to a dark gray, like right through here. So I'm going to put that in. And right now, my ebony pencil is pretty dull. It's not very sharp at all, which is actually beautiful because if it's too sharp, sometimes you lose a little bit of control because it's like it almost it's like a marker sometimes. Like you either make a all the pressure, like the pressure, if you have a sharp point, the pressure is distributed right to that one single point. And if your pencil's a little bit on the duller side, that rounded kind of broader point um, distributes the weight a little bit more, and I feel like I've got a little bit more control over my darker values. There we go. So you notice how I'm going back over areas too. Like I'm drawing and then move on, and then I'll kind of come back. So what I'm doing is I'm constantly evaluating. Is this dark enough compared to this? And I'm looking at it in my drawing as well. Excuse me. So this comes down, and this is a little bit of a hard line that comes around through here. And I messed up a little tag there, but it's not a big deal. I'm not going to erase that because I know that that's a dark area anyways, and that is going to be hidden. So there's that. Now I'm going to go back through, and you can see how as I draw my grid, my reference grid here is slowly starting to kind of disappear. There's a little highlight right in here. So I'm going to circle that. And then the rest of this is kind of I don't know, a 4 or a 5 value. And instead of doing circles this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade. And I know that this is my eyeball. And I can even see it in my reference picture. There's a little bit of value changes that happen throughout here. But when they change values, like they're actually following the contour of the eyeball. So I'm going to make sure that I do that. in my reference picture, or in my drawing rather. Now, as it moves away, as it moves from here, from this side to this side, it does get a little bit lighter, but we're talking like maybe from a 5 to a 4.5. So not much. It's pretty much, I mean, there's a little bit of variation of coming from here to here. So I'm gonna drag some of that stuff down there. That's about it. I'm happy with that. Let's go back and pick up that highlight a little bit. And there's almost like a shadow on either side. So that's a little bit darker there. And then now I'm missing some of these reference lines that I have outlined. So I'm gonna go back and put those in. So you probably can't even see what I just drew, which again, it's just, I put, like I didn't have these little guys drawn in. So I just went back through and on here drew those things in so that I know where those middle grays start to turn a little bit lighter. And now I'm looking here and there's some, like, the values kind of blend, but there's a little bit of line. And as I look at this, I can see that those are actually my eyelashes. I didn't even realize that that's what that was until just now. So I do want to make sure that I put those in. But not like we did when we practiced our eye sketches. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna drop them in heavy like we did on our sketches. I'm just gonna lightly and what I'll end up doing is I'll blend that too, which will make those little eyelashes disappear. And I'll just have to go in and put them in again. And because I'm doing this in graphite, I want to keep moving my head because sometimes the light, like I told you on when we did the grid on this, the light will reflect off of the graphite and kind of make it look like the values that I'm putting down are not as dark as they really are. So if I move my head back and forth, I kind of counteract that reflection. And it kind of helps me see exactly what values I have. go, going back through. This needs to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to stop there because I've been at it for about an hour. And like, even though I started from scratch and I didn't, I'll put you back. So even though I'm starting from a point today where I didn't even have my reference grid drawn, you can see that after, I mean, I've done this many, many times. And in the time that I've been working, I've only gotten this done. So take your time, be diligent, don't waste class time to do this, but be diligent, take your time, and you should have your goal should be to do like one difficult section every 2 or 3 days. So if I attack this for another, if I go at this for another hour, I would have probably this whole section done. I mean, there's a lot of challenging areas right in here that I just tackled. And the same thing with this. There's a lot of value changes, a lot of complexity going on here. Stuff like this section right here, like that's a piece of cake. I'll be able to do that in 5 minutes. Stuff like this, when I start a self-portrait, every time I start, I try to pick the harder areas, and then that makes it easier to budget my time in the end. So good luck on your self-portraits, and have fun. Don't stress.